Yeah, great. We're ready to start our first panel of the day. Welcome, everyone, once again. The panel is called a little bit provocatively, Why Do You Keep Destroying Yourself? And the panelists today are Kadmil from Lido, Rune Christensen from MakerDAO, Charlie Feng from Agora, and Sam from Lido. So let's give our panelists a round of applause.
Hi. What we wanted to talk about and what the title hints for is that quite a lot of DeFi protocols, especially good ones, building the mechanics allowing to protect users, even by at cost of somewhat like either harming the protocol or dissolving the protocol in order to get users the ultimate right for their tokens for what they've put in sorts. So that's the idea, and let's get it started. Rune, you're founder of the MakerDAO, which has really curious emergency shutdown mechanics. Could you explain a little bit what it is and how could it work potentially, and how would it protect Maker users? Just close. No, just close it. Huh? Ah, here it is.
Let's try again. All right. Yeah. So Maker is, we're the basically the oldest and largest DAO, coming up at 8 years at this point, that governs the world's largest decentralized stablecoin at around 5.3 billion DAI in circulation. And our goal has always been to deliver this extremely robust, resilient, source of stability and basically stablecoin product to real people, as many people as possible, because we want to try to use blockchain in a way that actually benefits and provides value for regular people in the real world. And as a part of this objective, from the very beginning, we realized that if this is our goal, if we want to actually create real stability and real value and protect users maximally, the maximal extent possible, we had to be able to deal with this very common entry-level issue that all DAOs, well, most DAOs have, which is the governance attack. So our solution to the governance attack is a type of minority token holder protection, which allows a minority of the MKR token holders to shut down the protocol and allow everyone to retrieve their share of the underlying collateral as end users of the system, right? So if an attack happens, you can shut down the protocol, then nobody loses any money, everyone gets sort of settled out in the underlying collateral. So in theory, that's theoretically, that sounds great. Now you're protected, now nobody can lose money. What we actually realized that is in practice, this is actually still not good enough because the number one thing we've learned in Maker over the last 8 years is that this early stage perspective that we've had in the crypto industry has been way too sort of inward and tech focused. And the entire time, there's been very little focus and very little desire to understand what users actually want and how do we actually get users to use this. So we had a lot of discussion about this before this panel, right? That, yeah, you can build some amazing, secure, fancy tech. That's great in theory, but if you can't get it adopted, then it's actually, all that effort is pointless, right? Because you're actually protecting nobody, since nobody's using your thing. So that's something I think is extremely important to keep in mind, and this is what the space at this point needs to push more, that we can't just stay out in theory, we gotta focus on what's real, how can we find that kind of middle ground where we can deliver the security of the blockchain as a Trojan horse, right, where you get what you actually care about as a user, which is absolutely not security. Nobody cares, nobody thinks about that, nobody thinks about decentralization. Everyone who cares about that stuff, they were in crypto 3 years ago already. We've exhausted the supply of that type of user long ago, right? And we need to focus on normal people who absolutely do not care about nerding out about some tech security stuff, right? So that means the tech, the security, has to be attached on the back end of something that's actually interesting, and it cannot get in the way of that, right? You can't have the security measures, the tech, the fancy theory impact the user experience, because again, then what happens is you end up protecting nobody because nobody will use your thing.
I see, thank you. Like, people who care about decentralization and security of cryptographic and decentralized finance protocols are mostly in this room, I guess. So, with all caveats of emergency shutdown inside, there are different designs of protecting the user still. And one of the very curious is forking mechanics, which Nouns DAO has implemented, and Charlie has helped to design, at the very least. Could you cover a bit what the forking mechanics of Nouns is and what it does itself for?
Yeah, happy to. I can't take too much credit for the design of the Nouns DAO fork. That's credits to the Verbs team there. But we at Agora build a lot of governance tooling for different DAOs. And we get the privilege to kind of see different mechanisms or different ways of approaching kind of minority protection, or kind of, in this case, I think for Nouns, for those who don't know what Nouns is, it's a NFT project that does a lot of public goods. It's famous for its kind of one noun a day forever, and it's governed by whoever holds a nouns. And it's quite a simple concept, but over time, as with most communities, you start to realize that there are different stakeholders that starts to emerge. And it's no longer a homogeneous group of people, right? There's people with different beliefs, different interests, and then different incentives, as well as how you should run the project starts to diverge at some point in time. And then it begs the question of, well, how do you protect the minority? So the mechanism that Nouns, I think it was a couple months back, that with the V3 released, was this forking mechanism that allows kind of a minority, as long as you have more than 20%, or as long as more than 20% of the minority bands together, you're allowed to fork the DAO into kind of a perfect replica, if you will. And I think the intention here is definitely minority protection, but one of the interesting things of implementing such a mechanism is that it creates, I don't want to use the word threat, but it creates the ability for, it actually kind of, I think, ends up having more dialogue, or creates more dialogue now, right? Because previously, if you are I guess the word is kind of like an oppressed minority, let's say, as the majority, unless I believe you have a real chance of getting to 51%, I could kind of ignore your thoughts, right? But now, with such a mechanism in place, it kind of forces me to engage a dialogue, because it does pose a serious consequences to the rest of the DAO. So, similar to what Rune says, there's some, in practice, there's some interesting dynamics that plays out afterwards.
I see, thank you. And as for Lido DAO, and that's like maybe two prongs. Well, there are two kind of designs, two kind of security features built into voting and DAO setup. One already built in, which is objection phase, and the second, which Sam has talked about, is dual governance. Sam, could you cover what objection phase thing is, and the gist of what dual governance is about for ones who just joined?
Yeah. So objection phase is something that already working. Is like the mechanism that replaces basically the execution time lock with a phase where the voters can only vote against the proposal. So it's basically an execution time lock with the editability to reject the proposal. So it gives more time for honest DAO members or slow DAO members to notice that something is going to pass and to act against. So this is a really simple mechanism. Surprisingly, we haven't found it in the wild. So it was like, really curious thing, why haven't anybody implemented this before? Or maybe someone has, like just we didn't know about that. And the dual governance is the way for stakers to first to introduce a dynamic extended time lock on governance decision. Then negotiate with the DAO if they are against this proposal, and if these negotiations don't yield any positive result, to rage quit the protocol while the governance is blocked. So this is basically the gist of it. It's not a forking in full because the protocol has two sides. Actually, there are two types of users. There are stakers and there are node operators. And this mechanism doesn't allow node operators to leave. Like this would be a really nice thing, in my opinion, if we could like build this coordination mechanism for the full fork. The complexity is that first, this coordination is not a simple one because you have to match users with node operators, and all of the parties should participate in that. And the second one is that like there are some technical limitations. We have to have the withdrawal contract upgradable, withdrawal credentials contract upgradable, and there is no way to repoint validators to another withdrawal credentials right now in Ethereum. So this stays in the way of implementing this the full forking mechanics. Yeah, and this is not like a poison pill either, because it doesn't protect users who are passive. So you have to be active in order to exit. So global settlement will be like poison pill. We call this global settlement was an option that we considered, and probably we should consider it implemented in the future. Just right now we are while we don't have bytecode verified contracts and ossified critical parts of the code, for example, staked ETH minting. We don't think it's we think it might create an attack vector on the protocol if there is some vulnerability in the token mechanics. So we are almost sure there is no vulnerability. We are sure there is no vulnerability, but vulnerabilities it might be even produced by some compiler bug. So it happened in the wild.
Thank you. So usually any security measure you have built in costs you something. And usual question one gets asked is basically whether hadn't you solved it somewhat easier, or whether you had to go more complex way. So that's the next question for protocol designers on the panel I do have. Rune, could you cover what kind of solutions have you passed on emergency shutdown, or is the emergency shutdown good enough in your view? So what kind of easier solutions hadn't cut it, or what was the design considerations here?
Yeah, my opinion is that you want to build a system that is obviously as simple as it can possibly be, because that just inherently gives you not only resilience, but also growth potential, because it's safer, it's less likely to break, and it's easier to market and explain. So if you could just build super simple smart contracts, that would be amazing. Unfortunately, the next thing is you gotta have the features that people want. And with stablecoins, this quickly becomes a bit of a nightmare, because it turns out that maintaining the stability of something to a real life, sort of real world unit of account is totally not a simple challenge at all. So there is just this massive requirement in terms of you've got to have a lot of complexity to deliver the feature people actually cares about. Because again, I mean, without growth, without users, if you're not doing all this cool stuff for the sake of some real people that are going to use it, it's all pointless, right? And basically, I think then the last sort of pillar of this is you have to then make sure that all of this is sort of fundamentally verifiably secure, right? You can't allow it probable edge cases where people lose money or get screwed over in some way that they wouldn't expect if you assume that they're not going to be experts and sit down and read a book about it or something, right? And where I'm going with this is that what this means is often you do have to basically if you have to choose between a simple solution that is more secure, but as a cost of that sort of, again, like impedes adoption in some shape or form. Unfortunately, you gotta add more complexity to make it smooth and make it adoptable. Because otherwise your simple solution may as well not be a solution at all, right? And I was just talking about this earlier, that emergency shutdown, this poison pill approach that we have thought that was the final and complete solution for the past 8 years. But the reality is it isn't if you consider large enough scale, right? So at small scale, it's fine for some medium-sized financial piece of infrastructure to shut down. Like, it wouldn't be a complete disaster if the Maker protocol shut down tomorrow. It would suck for a lot of people, absolutely, especially for me, no doubt. But it wouldn't like cause like massive harm on like a global scale, right? But if you then assume that Maker was 1,000 times more adopted globally, right? Then an emergency shutdown would be maybe as bad or worse than something like, the complete meltdown of a financial system, or like Terra collapsing, or something totally crazy, causing massive losses, right? Because now we're talking about a systemically important financial infrastructure basically like ceasing to appear, which is kind of like suddenly no airplanes are flying anymore, or something like that, right? Which is really like, it's disastrous when you reach a large enough scale, right? So you can't allow that kind of outcome to be built into the protocol and be available for someone to trigger at will, because it's a DAO and it's decentralized or whatever, right? So we gotta come up with a solution that gives us what we need from emergency shutdown, from the ability to basically stop bad actors and put the system back together so that we can remove those bad actors and actually keep everything running with no impact on user experience. And that is not exactly easy, but we do basically have a design for this that we will implement as the last stage of the end game plan, right? Of this big overhaul that we're doing with Maker. Yeah, and it all comes back to the idea that we want to really grow, we want to really bring blockchain to the real world, and we want to give the best measure of security, of transparency, of stability that you possibly can with blockchain. We want to make sure that it's provided to as many people as possible, and that we're not being irresponsible in setting up a kind of ticking time bomb, right? Where there are features in this system that, like, there are situations where the so-called security features become the vulnerability itself.
Thank you. So basically, in a sense, like, not the designs have been abandoned in favor of current emergency shutdown, but the emergency shutdown doesn't cut it for the scale Maker is shooting for. So that's another stage. And as for forking, which Charlie has you've talked about, like, that sounds pretty complex. Basically, the question is, why hadn't you had something like smaller or easier? And what's the actual like design idea? Like, why exactly forking is good for nouns? Let's say, why is it a good idea?
Well, I guess we'll still see kind of if it's a good idea as the governance experiment is kind of playing out in real time. I think one of the for those of you who don't know nouns, but if you're interested in governance, I'd recommend you check it out, because it's never not boring. It's constantly experimenting with different mechanisms and different kind of governance innovations, which personally fascinates me a lot. And when it comes to the forking, going back to kind of the original intentions of the fork, I still think it's both noble and important, which is to protect the minority or protect the users at the end of the day. But I think one of the things that is perhaps unintentional is the fact that transparency and accessibility cuts both ways. You can't be accessible to just the good players or the good actors, right? You could either make it accessible or not accessible. And as soon as you open the transparency and accessibility, you kind of open it to all. So what ended up happening that was interesting to observe is that, yes, it allowed the, what I would call kind of the honest minority to fork out of the DAO because they were not aligned or they had different beliefs, those stakeholders. It also gave an opportunity of attack vector for perhaps the bad actors or the dishonest minority, where they realized that there was a difference between book value and the market price, and there's an arbitrage to be made. And now we're seeing kind of the real life governance experiment play out of, well, how do you deal with this attack? the practicality is quite a bit more messier than I think than the theoretical. So now we're kind of seeing nouns initially potentially actually trying out something like a poison pill. We kind of saw the Treasury maybe either trying to accelerate spend or spend the Treasury down in a way that it's no longer kind of profitable for the arbitrager. So there's a bit of that, and now we're kind of seeing what we realize is maybe 20% is not the right number. It got lowered to 10% at one point in terms of the percentage of minorities that's required to create a fork. Now there's a proposal actually live right now about like, should we increase this to 30%? We'll yet to see what is the magic number, or if there is a magic number, but there's probably some degree of equilibrium where hopefully you're protecting the minority, but not at the cost of too much to the majority. So there's an interesting trade-off here of how to think about this. I don't have all the answers, but it's very fascinating to learn from.
I see, thank you. And Sam, basically, the short version of the question, what easier designs have you abandoned? Let me pick one particular. Can we get rid of dual governance and just set up a multi-sig?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get it a lot. Like the thing is that of all the designs that we like considered, including the multi-sig, there is no like only dual governance in or more complex systems allow two things. First, give users more agency. So not that multi-sig decides for the users what's good for them, what's not, but give users the agency. And at the same time, give them the leverage of negotiation with the DAO, and give them the safe way of leaving the protocol. So, like, if you want the combination of three things, of these three things, then like the dual governance was like the simplest mechanism we arrived at. So, yeah, it is complex, and I would really love to have something much more simple. But yeah, like any simpler mechanism doesn't fulfill these three goals. And I think all of them are really important. Vote voting is really important because it's the most powerful mechanism out here of all the mechanisms, I mean voting mechanisms. The agency is important because why would you decide what is good for users and what is bad for users? Giving any actor this power of decision, like it basically undermines the whole idea of what we're trying to improve. Because right now, like the LDO holders decide what's good for users, what's not. And we are trying to like improve this because it creates a principal agent problem. And introducing any kind of committee just adds one more principal agent problem. So you just multiply agents, and this is not the solution in my opinion.
So basically, you should in design you're striving to get like more agency and more principle, but not issues between those. Basically this consideration gets me back to the question whether like the solution you do have, and that gets back to the first thing Rune has mentioned, whether the solution you have right now kind of cuts it, and what like the next potential stage could be. So Rune, could you cover what next like generation of user protection in MakerDAO could look like?
Well, so I'll just briefly explain the whole, basically what we got coming up. That I guess, as I said earlier, the end stage is basically the best possible solution we could come up with. That was as simple as possible, but provided this complete and sort of full and uniform protection at the level of security and at the scale we want the system to be able to operate safely at. And then from there, with all of those pieces in place, then the question is, how do we distribute all this great and fancy theoretical security out to real users in the real world, right? And so one thing we're doing in a couple of months is we're rebranding Maker. So there's going to be a rebrand. So DAI and MKR will stick around, but the project as a whole will get a new and more streamlined brand that is basically slightly more thought through than, you know.
Any teaser? What the name would be?
It's not finalized. It's not revealed yet. But you'll know when it is. Hopefully, we'll make sure people know. So, but then a key part of what's coming after this rebrand, right? Which is basically changing Maker endgame from this nebulous, here's a bunch of features and so on, to more of like a feeling, you know, something that's a little bit more simple and doesn't mean you have to read 500 pages of super complicated stuff to feel like you know what's going on, right? But the main feature that's going to be available is sub-DAOs, right? So sub-DAOs is actually somewhat relevant to like the forking mechanism of nouns, for instance. Like this idea that there are multiple different subgroups, and instead of trying to put everyone together in one giant monolithic pile where they have to fight it out in, you know, super complicated multidimensional governance, you create many smaller DAOs, and you sort of, you know, indirectly connect them to the main DAO, and then you allow them to specialize in different areas, and you allow them to fail. So people who have different beliefs about, you know, real assets is the future, or real assets specifically in Latin America is the future, or go all purist, all out, you know, all in on ultra decentralized, purist, decentralized collateral. That's where the money is, so that's where the opportunity is. Instead of having to decide that on a sort of this top-down basis for the whole DAO, individual groups can make those decisions individually. And then some of them will make the wrong decisions, but that's their own, that's kind of their own, you know, they're putting their own capital, they're putting their own, you know, money where their mouth is. Yeah, so, and then finally, all of this is distributed out to the final, like the end user of the system, right? The holder of the new stablecoin get these sub-DAO tokens for free and get to choose, what do I want to bet on? What do I think is the secure solution, right? The thing that's going to deliver stability, is going to deliver value. So in this way, this is really, I mean, the essence of how we're trying to like gamify and make interesting these fundamental questions of security and user resilience, right? By being like, look, it's not a boring theory thing. It's like a question of, what do you believe in? What do you want to be a part of? You know, are you willing to take risk and make decisions on behalf of others, but also, you know, be on the line if there's losses, but get upside if there's advantages, right? And hopefully this means that we can actually also draw users more into the underlying questions of what's really going on. What is it really that makes this stuff stable? Or if they don't want to, just make it really easy and fun to adopt and get some yield, and make sure that, again, a lot of people actually end up benefiting from all of these features and advantages.
I see, thank you. So basically the question for the answer is decentralizing the already decentralized thing. So get it more diversified of sorts, which brings complexity. So looking forward for next stage to see how it balances out with user adoption and ease of understanding and ease of use. And to the same vein, you mentioned, Charlie, you mentioned that like right now, one of the questions before announced DAO is what the threshold for potential forking could be. Like maybe you would be looking to some automatization of like figuring that thing out, or maybe there is some like more higher order solution you are looking for. So maybe there is like better alternative than just setting up the number by another vote.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. In many ways, I think the experiment is still kind of playing out. And again, credits to the Verge team, and there's a bunch of different players announced that are kind of discussing different options. And the adjusting the fork, the threshold of the fork is just one of the levers, I suppose, that's being played around right now. There's a couple other suggestions of, for example, do you spend the treasury faster? Do you create some mechanism like a burn mechanism? But there are all different ways to, I guess, close, I guess, the arbitrage or the flaw that was created by the fork mechanism. And I think for me, it goes back to kind of like the purpose of, to me, a good governance system is the ability to kind of balance trade-offs of different stakeholders across a DAO as a collective. And for nouns, there's definitely multiple stakeholders. I think for DeFi, it's probably even more true, where you have users, and let's say you have token holders. And the reality is, both sides kind of need each other, right? You can't just, like if you imagine kind of the thought experiment of playing a DAO where you have one stakeholder have all the power to the extreme, in no case does that ever work. Like you can't have I mean, I guess you can have an ossified protocol that has just users, but the argument there would be that eventually it'll get outdated. Some other protocol will probably come along. If you have a protocol where it's just token holders, then there is no value being created that the users are creating. So there's an interesting kind of design question here of how do you design a system where it will continuously balance the incentives of the different stakeholders, hopefully without, I think going back to the sentence of like, if there is something exploitable, it will eventually happen. So, and you could allow social norms to kind of carry you for so long, but it'll likely not carry you to last the test of time. So codifying these kind of mechanisms that allows these different stakeholders and their incentives to be balanced properly is, I guess we'll see how that plays out.
I see, thank you. And some question to you. Do you see like current stage of design of dual governance as an ultimate say to protecting stakers from like whatever risks token voting gets to govern?
Definitely not. So, like there are several like global directions in which we can further improve the protection. The first one is like the ultimate goal the ultimate goal for us like is to reduce the governance risk. And like the most efficient way of reducing the governance risk is to reduce the governance. So the first like global and very important direction is modularization and gradual ossification of the code, so that governance cannot change the parts of the protocol that are, or either cannot, or it is really, really, really hard to do. For example, it requires, I don't know, 1 year time lock to change the code that is really at the core of the protocol. So this is like the first direction. And it probably requires bytecode verification of the code, because if something cannot be changed or can be changed only in a year, you want to be really, really sure that it doesn't contain any vulnerability, even if it's generated by the incorrect compiler pipeline. This is like the first global direction. And the second global direction is improvement of protection of users, of foot voting. For example, right now, we don't have like the protection for passive users. So there are some level of protection because like the minority can extend the time lock for governance decision, and this gives more time for passive holders to notice, or maybe for active holders to like socially amplify the information about the bad governance decision, so they can actually, the passive holders can react. But it's still not like the ideal level of protection. So something that allows passive holders to be protected, it might be a delegation of the veto power, or it might be a poison pill. This is like one of the potential research directions, I think really important ones. And finally, there is like the idea of the full DAO forking, which is I really like it, but like yeah, it requires a lot of effort in research and implementation.
Got it. Yeah, and forking sounds fun unless it happens at very least. So I wanted to ask one more like a closing question maybe to all of our panelists. Basically, everyone in DeFi, everyone like in protocols which came out to be successful, came out to get user adoption and user trust ultimately, are working darn hard, are like devising very complex mechanics to like protect users, to get something happening decentralized in novel way. So my main question is, why do you, like personally or your team in general, put so much effort and put so much at risk for the thing you're building in so hard, and allowing the external forces and the users to say, okay, whatever you built is like it doesn't cut it. I want to break in. I want to go out. What all this effort is for? What are you working towards so hard?
Yeah, I gotta be honest that I would, it's a bit of the sunk cost fallacy for me. That when I first got into DAOs, right? I mean, what I was promised 8 years ago was a DAO is basically you just kind of write a white paper, you maybe like code up some code, and then like the free market will take care of it. You don't have to do anything. Apparently that's wrong. And now we're like in too deep, and there's like $5 billion at stake, and we need to find a way to make that system automatically keep that secure for all eternity. And apparently, that takes a lot of work. But that's also why we call our the sort of the code name, right, for a big overhaul is Endgame, because the point is this is supposed to be the final effort to fix it once and for all. After which we can relax. So I guess I work really hard, so in the future I would not have to work so hard.
I see, Charlie.
Oh, that's a good answer. For me, I come from a fintech background, so what got me interested into the space in the first place was actually DeFi. And then I quickly realized that I just found DAOs so inefficient. Like, if you compare it to kind of traditional organizations, maybe that's a taboo subject to get into, but coming from that side of the world, it feels like if DAOs are going to be the promise of the DAOs are going to be that end-all be-all, or that organization that could actually provide that transparency or that level of accessibility and all kind of the good things that DAOs could potentially provide, it needs to get a lot more efficient. And that's what pulled me into building governance tooling and realizing that if we don't build both more practical tools as well as kind of think more deeply about how these mechanisms will play out, I don't think it'll work out very well. So that's what got me really into kind of the governance space specifically. And then in terms of when I look at kind of like maybe DeFi or the products around crypto as a whole, coming from a fintech background, I think one of the things I really do believe in is the idea where so much of our lives revolves around the financial system at the end of the day. And having sovereignty over kind of your effectively money gives you also sovereignty over your time, right? That's kind of the fundamental idea where I could work this year and maybe portably, like I could port time to take a break next year. If that bridge, if you will, kind of disappears, then, well, I guess you don't get that anymore, so.
And Sam, are you looking to get some rest?
Yeah, why I'm working so hard on this, like, to be honest, I'm just, like, the answer is really simple. I'm scared to shit about what the bad outcome can be of an attack on the DAO. And, like, this is what actually keeps me wake up at night. So, yeah, also like reducing risks for users, even at the expense of the governance, it's not really an expense for the governance, because like when you decrease the redemption risks, it makes your protocol so much more trusted and valuable that the upside is like it outweighs any possible downside, decreasing in governance power and all that. So there is a bad governance power and there is a good governance power. We want to decrease the bad governance power, that is like the ability to reg the users as much as we can, and to keep the good governance power, which is like spending treasury, maybe improving the protocol, improving its mechanics. But yeah, there is a balance here, and yeah, we are yet to find it out.
I got it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining the panel. Thank you for listening. And I guess that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.